The ring wasn't hers to want. The name wasn't hers to keep. She had understood that much on the morning of the wedding, standing in the narrow hallway of her parents' house, while her mother adjusted the collar of her traveling dress and said nothing that mattered. The ceremony itself lasted less than 20 minutes. The minister had mispronounced her surname twice. Her new husband, Mr. Whitmore, Caden Whitmore, though she had not yet learned to think of him by his given name, had stood beside her with the particular stillness of a man attending to an obligation rather than a beginning. Lenora had not expected more than that. She was 24, the second daughter of a family whose debts had grown faster than their land could recover from them. And Caden Whitmore was a man of 31 with a house in Virginia and no particular attachment to anyone living inside it. The arrangement had been her father's doing. She had not been consulted so much as informed, which she supposed was the way of things, though it had not made the informing any easier to receive. She had cried once, privately, the night before, not from heartbreak, but from something closer to exhaustion. The grief of being handed from one life to another like a piece of furniture someone had decided they no longer had room for. The house was called Beecham. It sat on a rise above a slow-moving river in the lowland part of the county, 3 stories of pale brick with green shutters that had faded to the color of old sage. The housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Old, met them at the door with the composed expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything her employer brought home. She showed Lenora to her rooms, a bedroom and a small adjoining sitting room, both clean, both furnished with a kind of careful impersonality, and left her there with a pitcher of water and a window that looked out over a kitchen garden. Caden Whitmore did not come to her rooms that first night, nor the second. By the third morning, Lenora had stopped listening for his footsteps in the hallway and started learning the house instead. Beecham was the kind of house that held its silences in different temperatures. The library was cold even in summer because the windows faced north, and the curtains were always half drawn. The front parlor was stifling before noon because someone, years ago, had decided the east-facing windows should be kept uncurtained, and no one had thought to revisit that decision since. The kitchen was the warmest room in the house, which was not an accident. Mrs. Old ran it like a small, well-defended territory, and Lenora spent the first week earning her way in it by the simple strategy of asking questions and listening to the answer. She learned that Mr. Whitmore, Caden, took his breakfast alone, always, that he kept irregular hours, often riding out before the household was awake and returning after dark, that he had a younger brother named Foster who visited occasionally and drank too much when he did, that the previous Mrs. Whitmore, if there had been one, was not spoken of, not because of any particular tragedy, Mrs. Auld implied, but simply because there hadn't been one. He had never been married before. That surprised Lenora more than she expected it to. She had assumed, without quite articulating the assumption, that she had been brought here to replace something. A first wife, perhaps, a household that had come undone. But there was no ghost to compete with. There was only the house itself, and the man who moved through it, like a guest who had forgotten he owned the place. And the question of what she was supposed to be doing here, that she hadn't yet found a way to ask. The first real conversation they had. Not pleasantries, not the logistics of household management, but something that required both of them to actually be present, happened on a Wednesday evening in late October, 6 weeks after the wedding. She had been in the library, because the cold didn't bother her the way it seemed to bother everyone else in the house, and she had pulled a book from the shelf that turned out to be a surveyor's journal from 1812, which was not what she had been reaching for, but which was, she discovered, considerably more interesting than it had any right to be. Caden came in without knocking. It was his library, she reminded herself. He was allowed, and stopped when he saw her. "I didn't know you were in here," she said, and then felt immediately that the sentence had come out with more edge than she had intended. He didn't look offended. He looked, she thought, mildly curious, which was not a quality she had attributed to him yet. "It doesn't," he said, and came to the desk at the far end of the room and opened a ledger that had clearly been waiting for him. For a while neither of them spoke. The fire in the grate, which had been burning low when she arrived and had not improved significantly since, made a sound like settling paper. "That's the Barlow survey," he said, without looking up from the ledger. "I gathered. The handwriting is very bad. My grandfather's. He always wrote as though he were in a hurry to finish writing." Lenora looked at the cramped, slanting script. "Did he finish anything?" "Not the survey," Caden said. "He got as far as the eastern boundary line and then apparently decided it wasn't worth the trouble." She found, unexpectedly, that she wanted to ask more. About the grandfather, about the boundary line, about what else in this house had been started and left incomplete. But she didn't, because she was not yet certain of the rules. What was permitted? What would be received as intrusion? And she had learned early in her life that it was better to understand the rules before you broke them. She closed the journal and set it back on the shelf where she had found it. When she left, she thought she heard him exhale, though it might have been the fire. The letter arrived at the end of November. It came addressed to Caden, which was nothing unusual, but the handwriting on the outside was familiar enough to Lenora that she felt the air go out of the hallway when Mrs. Old handed it to her to pass along. She recognized the hand because she had seen it on 20 years' worth of birthday cards and church registers and grocery lists. It belonged to her sister. Her sister's name was Bryn. Bryn Alcott now, married 3 years prior to a man named Theodore Alcott, who managed his family's cotton interests out of Charleston, and who Lenora had met exactly twice and found both times to be the kind of man who listened to his own sentences the way other people listened to music. Bryn had married him enthusiastically, and had spent the subsequent 3 years writing letters home that contained no unhappiness, and very little truth as far as Lenora could tell. She did not know why Bryn would be writing to Caden. She passed the letter along at dinner that evening, and watched his expression when he saw the name on the envelope. He did not look surprised. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been expecting something and was only now reckoning with having been right. "From your sister," she said, which was not a question. "Yes," he said, and put the letter in his jacket pocket without opening it, and they ate the rest of the meal in a silence that had changed quality somehow, though she could not have said precisely how. She found out the nature of it 3 days later, not from Caden, but from Foster. Foster Whitmore was 26 years old, and possessed of the particular recklessness that sometimes afflicts men who have grown up in the shadow of more capable brothers. He was not malicious, Lenora had decided. He was simply careless in the way of someone who had never quite had to account for the weight of his carelessness. He arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a case of bourbon and a restlessness that filled the front parlor like weather. Caden was not at the house, Lenora was. "He hasn't told you," Foster said, about an hour into a conversation she had not entirely planned to be having, the fire doing more work now that someone had actually fed it properly. "Told me what?" she said, without the rising inflection that would have made it a question. She had learned, over the course of her 24 years, that people volunteered more when you let the absence of a question sit between you like an empty chair. Foster turned his glass in his hands. "About why the Alcotts are writing to him. I didn't know they'd written before. Twice last month. Once in October." He looked at the fire rather than at her. "Your sister and Theodore Alcott have, there was a situation, last spring. An investment Caden put money into. Alcott's people managed the accounts. And some of that money." He stopped. "I'm telling you this because someone should tell you. Not because I think it's my place." Lenora set down her own glass. "How much money?" "Enough," Foster said. "Enough that it's not just an inconvenience." She thought about Bryn's letter. She thought about the handwriting she had recognized, and the way Caden had put the envelope in his pocket without opening it, and the quality of the silence at the dinner table. She thought about the fact that she had been brought here 6 weeks ago and handed a household to manage, and very carefully told nothing. "Does he think I knew?" she said. Foster looked at her then. "I don't know what he thinks. Does he think my family knew? That I was sent here to?" She stopped herself. The sentence was too ugly to finish. "That this marriage was meant to cover something." "I don't know," Foster said again, and this time she believed him. She waited for Caden at the top of the stairs that evening. Not because it was a dramatic choice, but because the library was too cold, and the parlor was where Foster was sleeping off the afternoon's bourbon, and she needed to be somewhere that wasn't behind a closed door. She wanted him to see her before he had decided what expression to arrange on his face. He came in just before. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at her with the particular wariness of a man who is not certain what he has walked into. "Foster told me," she said, "about the Alcotts, about the money." A pause. "Did he?" "He didn't tell me the amount. I'd like to know the amount." Caden came up 3 steps and stopped, which put them roughly at the same height. "Why?" "Because it happened in my family," she said. "Because you have clearly spent the last 6 weeks deciding whether I was party to it, and I would like the opportunity to tell you directly that I was not." He said nothing. She held the silence. "I knew there were debts," she said. "I knew my father had debts. I didn't know their shape or their direction. I didn't know they led here." She paused. I wouldn't have come if I'd known. Not like this. What would you have done instead? He said. And it was a real question, she could tell. Not a deflection, not a challenge. He actually wanted to know. She thought about it honestly. I don't know. Something else. Found some other way. She looked at him. But I didn't have the chance to, because no one told me there was a reason I would need to. Caden stood there on the third step for a long moment. He looked like a man reassembling something he had taken apart too hastily. The amount, he said finally, is $12,000. Lenora absorbed that. And the Alcotts, Theodore Alcott specifically, moved that money without authorization. Without proper authorization. He'll claim there was an oral agreement. There wasn't, or if there was, it wasn't with him. And my sister. She made herself ask it. Did Bryn know? The pause before his answer was long enough to mean something. I think she knew that her husband had been creative with other people's money. I don't think she knew the full extent. He looked at her. I'm not certain of that. No, Lenora said. I don't imagine you are. The thing about Bryn that was difficult to explain to anyone who had not grown up alongside her was that she was not a wicked person. She was a person who had learned very early that other people's carelessness could serve as cover for her own choices if she positioned herself correctly. She had spent 27 years perfecting the art of adjacency, standing close enough to trouble to benefit from it, far enough away to claim innocence when it arrived at the door. Lenora did not hate her for it. She had spent a long time thinking she should, and had found she couldn't quite manage it. What she felt instead was something more like a grief, for the version of Bryn she had believed in when they were children, when Bryn had been simply her sister, and the world had not yet sorted them into categories of usefulness and expendability. She wrote to Bryn the following week. Not a long letter. 5 sentences. I know about the accounts. I know you've written to Caden. I would like you to write to him again, this time with everything. Not the version that protects Theodore, the version that's true. If you do that, I will not write to Father about what Theodore has done. If you don't, I will, and you know what Father will do with that information. She did not sign it with love. She signed it with her name. Bryn's reply took 10 days and ran to 4 pages, which was more than Lenora had expected and considerably less coherent. The relevant portion, once she had worked through the justifications and the self-exonerations and the 2 paragraphs about how Theodore had always been under a great deal of pressure, was this. Theodore Alcott had moved the money. He had done it with the belief, not documented, not formalized, but genuinely held, that Caden Whitmore would not look too closely. He had been wrong about that, and Bryn had known, for approximately 7 months, that her husband had been wrong. She had not told anyone, because telling anyone would have required deciding what to do about it, and Bryn had never been good at decisions that cost her something. Lenora brought the letter to Caden in the library on a Tuesday afternoon, when the fire was doing what it was supposed to do. She set it on the desk in front of him and sat down in the chair across from him and waited while he read it. He read it twice. This is enough, he said when he finished. Enough for what? To recover the money. Or most of it. Alcott won't want this in front of a court. The paper trail he left behind is embarrassing enough without his wife's letter being entered into evidence. He looked at the pages in his hands. How did you get this out of her? I told her the truth, Lenora said. That doing nothing was no longer an option. He looked at her. The firelight was doing something to the angles of his face that she had not noticed before, or perhaps she had not been sitting close enough before to notice. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, it wasn't your debt. It was my family, she said, and this is my house, whether either of us planned it that way. She held his gaze. I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm asking you to stop treating me like a variable you haven't solved for yet. The silence after that was different from the silences they had inhabited over the past weeks. It had weight and temperature, and the specific quality of something about to be decided. I owe you an apology, Caden said. I assumed you were connected to it. Not in the same way as Alcott, but I thought. He stopped. I should have asked you directly. Yes, she said. You should have. I'm asking now. Is there anything else I should know? Anything your family? There is one thing, she said, because honesty, she had decided, was the only currency worth holding. My father was aware that there was a shortfall in the accounts. I don't know if he knew the origin of it. I don't know if he brought me here believing this arrangement would buy goodwill somehow. I genuinely don't know. She paused. I think it's possible. I think it's possible my father is more aware of the shape of this than I was. I cannot account for him. I can only account for myself. Caden said nothing for a long moment. Outside, the river was audible for the first time in weeks. The temperature had changed. Something was moving that hadn't been moving before. "All right," he said. "All right what?" "All right, I believe you." He set the letter down, "and I think I would like to start again, if that's possible. Not the marriage, I mean the day-to-day of it. The part where we're actually in the same house and behaving as though we have something to say to each other." Lenora looked at him for a long moment. "I'll agree to that," she said. "But I need something from you first." "What? Tell me things. Don't manage what I know. I can handle the truth. I've demonstrated that I can handle the truth, and I am not going to be useful to either of us if I'm kept outside the actual conversation." She said it quietly, without heat. It was not an ultimatum. It was a requirement. "That's what I'm asking for." Caden Whitmore looked at her for long enough that she could feel him deciding something. Not about her, she thought, but about himself. About the kind of man he intended to be inside this house. "That's fair," he said. "I know it's fair," Lenora said, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt something ease in her chest that she had stopped noticing was tight. The recovery of the money took most of the winter. Theodore Alcott, presented with Bryn's letter and the threat of public proceedings, negotiated with the desperate energy of a man who understood exactly how much he stood to lose. He paid back $11,300 in installments. The remainder, Caden absorbed. Lenora did not involve herself in the legal particulars, because they were not hers to manage. But she was present for the conversations that mattered. Sitting at the table in the library while Caden's solicitor laid out the options, and she was the one who said, when the solicitor suggested a more aggressive approach, "What does the less aggressive option cost us, and what does it preserve?" The solicitor had looked at her with the brief recalibration of a man who had not expected to be addressed, and then had answered her directly. Caden had said nothing about that afterward. But the following week, he had introduced her to his solicitor's wife at a dinner in town as "my wife, Lenora," which was the first time he had said her given name in front of other people, and she had filed that small fact away in the part of herself that kept track of distances being closed. Foster visited again in February and found, she suspected, a house that did not match the one he had left in November. He said nothing about it directly. He said, at breakfast on his second morning, watching Caden pass her the sugar bowl before she asked for it, "You both seem less like you're waiting for something." "We were waiting for winter to end," Lenora said. Said Foster, and looked between them in a way that suggested he understood perfectly well that she was not talking about the weather. Spring came early that year. The kitchen garden she had watched through her bedroom window all winter came back faster than she had expected. First the herbs along the south wall, then everything else in a rush that Mrs. Old said was unusual, as though the ground had been saving itself. Lenora was in that garden on a Saturday morning in March, doing nothing particularly useful, when Caden came to find her. He stood at the gate for a moment before he came through it, which she had learned was something he did when he was uncertain how to begin. "I had a letter from your father," he said. She straightened. "About what?" "He's asking whether we might visit. He'd like to." Caden paused. He framed it as a family visit. "I think what he actually wants is to understand where things stand." Lenora thought about her father. She thought about the question she had put to Caden in the library. "I think it's possible my father is more aware of the shape of this than I was." And the fact that she had not written to him directly, had not asked him what he had known when he had arranged this marriage. She had been waiting, she realized. Waiting to know whether she had enough ground under her feet to stand on when she had that conversation. "I'll write to him," she said. "Not to arrange the visit. Not yet. What will you say?" She looked at the herbs along the south wall, the ones that had come back first. "I'll tell him that things are well here. That I'm settled." She paused. "And I'll tell him that I know there were things he didn't tell me. And that when he's ready to be honest about them, I'd like to speak with him. Not as his daughter who does what she's told. As someone he owes an accounting to." Caden was quiet for a moment. "And if he doesn't agree to that, then we don't visit," Lenora said simply. "I'm not willing to pretend my way through a family dinner for the sake of his comfort." She said it without anger. It was just true, the way that certain things became true when you finally said them out loud. Caden looked at her for a long moment, with the expression she had come to recognize over the past few months, the one that meant he was revising something. "Would it be useful," he said, "if I wrote to him as well?" She considered it. "What would you say?" "I'd say that his daughter has conducted herself with considerably more integrity than most people I know," he said, "and that whatever his intentions were in arranging this marriage, he has my word that she is in a better position than she was when she arrived." It was more than she had expected. She felt something move in her chest. Not quite the same thing as the easing in the library, but related to it. Adjacent. You can say that, she said. If you mean it. I mean it, Caden said. She nodded, once, and turned back to the garden. After a moment she heard the gate open, and then she heard it stay open, and she realized he hadn't left. He had come in, and was standing behind her, looking at what she was looking at. Mrs. Old says the rosemary won't come back on the north end, he said. She says it never does. Then she hasn't been patient enough, Lenora said. Give it another 3 weeks. She didn't look at him when she said it. She didn't need to. She could feel him there, close enough that the distance between them had stopped being a distance and had started being something else entirely. The kind of space that two people make room in when they have decided, without quite saying so, that they intend to stay.